Good evening to our viewers in Korea and hello to others watching from around the world. Welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. Tensions continue to mount on the Korean peninsula with the two Koreas each bolstering their nuclear capabilities. North Korea has recently held a ceremony marking the delivery of 250 nuclear-capable missile launchers to frontline units, where Kim Jong-un called for a ceaseless expansion of the North Korean military's nuclear program to counter U.S. threats. South Korea, meanwhile, conducted a first-of-its-kind tabletop exercise with the U.S. to enhance response to North Korea's nuclear attack. All this as North Korea rejected South Korea's offer of flood damage relief, saying an enemy remains an enemy. For an in-depth analysis of these developments and more, our regular commentator, Dr. Myong-hyun, joins me in the studio. It's always great to have you with us.
It's always nice to be back.
And with us virtually from Washington, D.C. is Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Go, let's start with you. Let's first discuss the specifics of these missile launchers. What type are they? What is their capacity? And how big of a threat would it pose to the South Korean military if fully deployed along the border?
Well, it's going to be a major threat because we're talking about a massive number of new missile launchers. These launchers can carry the so-called Hwasong-11. Essentially, this is a very short-range ballistic missile. So, in fact, if the range is so short, we're talking about a maximum range of 110 kilometers. So we can even call it a very large artillery. So essentially a form of a multiply launched rocket system. But then in contrast to the typical multiply launched rocket system, it tends to be more conventional in nature. This type of missiles can carry, even though it has a short range, can carry a nuclear warhead. So what North Korea is essentially saying is that they can deploy up to 250 nuclear-capable short-range ballistic missile. So the idea here, or like the message that North Koreans are trying to imply by staging this kind of show of force, is that, first of all, they have the capability to build 250 nuclear warheads. That if they indeed have that kind of capability, they will say that North Korea has probably more nuclear warheads than France. I mean, France has a 300, so close to the French nuclear capability and arsenal. And second is that if they can launch these 250 nuclear-tipped tactical ballistic missiles at once and simultaneously, it can easily overwhelm any kind of defense that South Korea and the United States can mount against this kind of attack. So, in fact, I mean, you have to look at the timing of this show of force. It is very much coupled with what's going on right now in the Korean Peninsula. Well, what's going on is that there's the Ulchi freedom exercise taking place. So when North Koreans have timed this action to send a message to South Korea and the United States that they have a form of attack that can overwhelm any kind of defense that the two countries can mount together against this kind of threats.
So it sounds like it could pose quite a serious threat to the South Korean military.
But then there's a caveat here. North Korea hasn't been testing this kind of short-range ballistic missiles very often since last year, especially after September last year when Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un had their summit in Vladivostok. So the reason is because North Korea is sending all their surplus missiles, in fact, the brand new produced missiles to Ukraine right now to be used by the Russian forces. So the chances that North Koreans don't have this number of tactical ballistic missiles to be deployed anytime soon. So in that sense, this is more of a empty show of force on the part of North Korea.
So it could be quite a big of a threat to the South Korean military, but whether North Korea will actually be able to fully operate those launchers remains to be seen.
Exactly.
Dr. Klingner, marking the delivery of the missile launchers, Kim Jong-un vowed to continue boosting North Korea's nuclear program to counter U.S. threats. He added the U.S. That the U.S. North Korea confronts is not just an administration that remains in power for a few years, but a hostile state the North has to counter generation after generation. What are you reading into these remarks?
Well, after former President Trump told the Republican National Conference that he had a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un and that Kim probably misses him and wants him to win the election, North Korea responded by saying, well, they don't care which U.S. presidential candidate wins the election, and that both of them represent the continuation of U.S. hostile policy toward North Korea, which has continued for successive administrations. But sort of reading between the lines of North Korea's statement, they said if the U.S. wanted to prove that it didn't have a hostile policy and therefore Pyongyang might be willing to come back to negotiations, Washington would first have to cancel bilateral military exercises with South Korea, cease the rotational deployment of strategic or nuclear-capable assets to the peninsula, such as bombers and aircraft carriers and submarines. Then Pyongyang might be willing to talk with the United States. Now, Trump had canceled those military exercises and the rotational deployment of strategic assets during his presidency. So he may be willing to once again cancel that, which did degrade Allied deterrence and defense capabilities after he had done so. And then he may be more amenable to, if North Korea were reach out to have a peace declaration or a peace treaty negotiations, he may see that as a very positive development and that it would be very unique and never been accomplished, perhaps leading to a Nobel Peace Prize. My concern with that would be you first need to reduce the North Korean strategic missile and conventional force threat to South Korea, Japan, and the United States before signing a peace declaration.
So the North Korea, as you pointed out, previously mentioned that it doesn't care who wins the U.S. presidential election, and it also mentioned that no matter who takes power, U.S. will remain a hostile state. But in fact, Kim Jong-un is actually watching the election very closely, and he also may be aiming to have a second chance with Trump to have direct negotiations with him to get what he wants. And staying with you, Dr. Klingner, South Korea and the U.S., meanwhile, boosted their joint nuclear capabilities by holding their first joint tabletop exercise dubbed the Iron Mace 24. Tell us about its significance.
I think it is significant because it's a continuation of an ongoing process, really, of the past year and a half, where the U.S. has become much more transparent about its nuclear strategy, its nuclear policy in defending South Korea against a North Korean nuclear attack, as well as overall military attack. We've seen the process with the Nuclear Consultative Group, which was initiated as another way of trying to incorporate North Korea into the overall U.S. war plans, particularly the nuclear aspect of it, and to reassure our South Korean ally that we are working closely together. So it's a continuation of a process. We saw that in June and July, the U.S. and South Korea agreed to guidelines for the use of U.S. nuclear weapons in the defense of South Korea. And a particular emphasis on this tabletop exercise was what's called conventional nuclear integration, or CNI, where it's incorporating South Korea's conventional forces along with the U.S. nuclear and conventional forces and missile defenses to improve the overall deterrence and defense capabilities of the alliance. So the exercise was the first that simulated or incorporated scenarios where the North was threatening and then carrying out nuclear attacks on the South, and then the ally discussed how they would respond to that. So the details, of course, remain very highly classified and not public. But I think it's a continuation of this process, not only to deter North Korea, but also to reassure South Korea of the U.S. commitment to fulfill our treaty obligations.
As you mentioned, it's their first ever tabletop exercise on integrating Seoul's conventional forces with Washington's nuclear capabilities, and it goes in line with continual efforts made by the Nuclear Consultative Group, or NCG, aimed at boosting nuclear deterrence in various ways. Now, Dr. Go, South Korea and the U.S. will also conduct Ulji Freedom Shield exercise later this month, a large-scale annual drill aimed at bolstering the two allies' joint joint defense posture. Now, Pyongyang has long been quite sensitive to the UFS drill. What sort of reaction do you anticipate from the North this time around?
We're already seeing this with the North Korea's mounting this show of force by showcasing their 250 missile launchers. So it goes exactly to what Bruce just explained, which is North Korea is very much concerned about this CNI, the conventional nuclear integration. That's an implementation which been promised last year with the launch of the nuclear consultative group. So in essence, it's telling North Koreans that North Korea doesn't enjoy, so to speak, a limited nuclear monopoly over South Korea any longer, because the United States is putting in the table its nuclear capability to defend South Korea against the North Korea's nuclear threats. So essentially, even though the United States government, for a lot of strategic reasons and also as political reasons, doesn't want to say this loud, essentially it's answering North Korea's nuclear threats with nuclear response. And this cancels out North Korea's nuclear advantage over South Korea. And paradoxically speaking, North Korea lashing out against South Korea and the United States in a negative way, but it's threatening South Korea and the United States that whatever defensive measures the two countries can put on the table will be essentially neutralized by North Korea's new forms of threats and measures of attack. It's a paradoxical proof that South Korea and the United States have finally put on the table an effective measure to respond to North Korea's nuclear threat. And this isn't just the beginning stage. I would say if North Korea mounts more threats and showcase a higher level of nuclear development and missile systems, and the South Korea and the United States have already in each arsenal, or joint arsenal, a lot of effective measures to counter those. So I think North Korea is concerned, and then they probably understand that their window of opportunity in which they enjoy this strategic and military advantage over South Korea is closing fast. So I think we're going to see much more hectic response and behavior on the part of North Korea in the coming months and probably up till next year. And also we'll see more diplomatic action on the part of North Korea.
And some experts are also predicting quite serious, high-level, high-risk provocation around the U.S. presidential election, but we'll discuss that later on. Dr. Klingner, northwestern parts of North Korea along the Amnok River were hit hard by recent downpours, and we saw rare photos of Kim Jong-un boarding a rubber boat to inspect the impact of devastating floods. But North Korea rejected aid offers from both Russia and South Korea, although it showed a much more friendly stance toward Russia when doing so. What is the estimated damage, and how do you interpret North Korea's subsequent actions?
Well, it appears that thousands of houses have been flooded, that railroad and road bridges have been washed away, which could impact North Korea's economy because some factories are isolated from the surrounding area. The washing away the bridges could even impede North Korea's providing artillery and missiles to Russia because the transportation system has been impacted. Thousands of North Koreans have been stranded. Some 5,000 people were stranded in Sinwiju because of the flood. So it does seem like it's some extensive damage. And that's exacerbated by the deforestation, which is occurring in North Korea as people try to cut down trees for fuel, especially during the winter, and also the very dilapidated infrastructure in North Korea. So by having Kim go to the area, and they're trying to, the North Korean media is trying to hail him as sort of a hero, or certainly trying to rescue and help the North Korean people, and he's deflecting criticism of the situation by punishing or criticizing North Korean officials for negligence, even though really the problem is with the very poor condition of North Korean infrastructure. So as Kim focuses on building up the military rather than attending to the needs of his people, he doesn't want to be criticized for that. And then we did see North Korea rejecting all aid, not only from Russia, but also from South Korea and China, but certainly a different depiction. Overall, they're saying, no, we can handle this. We don't need help from the outside world. But they were much politer in their response to Russia, sort of emphasizing the growing and strengthening relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang, and then criticizing South Korea's offer of aid as, calling the situation much worse than it actually was, even though it does seem to be fairly dire. So they want to emphasize that North Korea can handle any problem, but also at the same time wanted to thank President Putin and emphasize the growing relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow.
Now to North Korea at the Paris Olympics, Dr. Go. The Hermit Kingdom sent 14 North Korean athletes to the global sporting event, and we caught a rare glimpse of North Korean athletes mingling with other players from different countries. What caught your attention, and how do you analyze North Korea's sports diplomacy?
Well, North Korea has already used this kind of events, the Olympics and the major sporting events, as a way to send a message to the international community. Just the mere fact that North Korea sent a delegation to participate in the Olympics is important, I would say, step forward. North Korea was very closed down during the COVID pandemics, and then there was some fear that North Korea is paranoia about external information, and also there's germs coming from the outside that would remain recluse. But then they are participating, and I think in itself is a message. And nothing is spontaneous about North Korea's demonstration of friendship or even smiles. This is essentially, I would say, a political gesture on the part of the regime. They are so I think, but then behind this friendliness that the North Korean athletes are showing in Paris, there's a clearly dichotomy here. So they are friendly, the athletes are friendly towards international peers, but then apparently they are shying away from interacting with their South Korean peers. So I think this is a message that follows what Kim Jong-un has been saying since last year, which is the two Koreas are totally separate entities, as if they are totally foreign to each other. And I think North Korea, in a way, deliberately is continuing with this message. But at the same time, I think the fact of the matter is North Korea is probably preparing the ground for a diplomatic outreach to other countries later this year. We have to take into consideration the political calendar in other countries, especially in the United States. We know that Kim Jong-un had a good relationship with former President Donald Trump, and Donald Trump claims the same. And this is an opportunity for North Korea to have another major diplomatic success at the heels of what they achieved with Russia. So Kim Jong-un recently hosted Russian President Vladimir Putin in Pyongyang, and it's totally natural for Kim Jong-un to have the same ambition of hosting Donald Trump if he indeed is able to return to the White House next year. So I think they are setting the stage for this kind of a diplomatic campaign later this year. But then it all hinges upon whether Kim Jong-un's former quote-unquote friend Donald Trump can make his return to the White House.
Dr. Klinger, South Korea's defense chief Shin Won-sik has recently stated that he's not ruling out the possibility of North Korea conducting its 7th nuclear test around the U.S. presidential election in November. How do you assess the likelihood of the test actually happening?
Well, some experts have asserted that North Korea always does something very provocative, either a nuclear test or a missile test or a long-range missile test during a U.S. and a South Korean election year. That is, except when they don't do that during an election year. So some have speculated that North Korea may explode a 7th nuclear test during, say, October to try to influence the U.S. election, perhaps to increase the chances that President Trump would return to office. But I don't really see much of an impact on the U.S. electorate. I think the voters have already made their choices, or if they're still undecided, it's not going to be determined by what North Korea does or doesn't do. Also, we don't know if Defense Minister Shin's comments were based on actual intelligence information or just speculation. And, for about 2.5 years ago, both Washington and Seoul said that a 7th nuclear test was imminent, and obviously that hasn't happened. So we expect that another test, whenever it occurs, would not be a repeat of the very large nuclear weapon tests that they did in 2017, but instead would be a very small nuclear test because it would be testing these very short-range tactical nuclear warheads, the kind of which we saw for the 250 missiles that were just rolled out. So, a nuclear test wouldn't necessarily affect the U.S. election, but it would be another indication of the very real and growing nuclear and missile threat to South Korea, as well as Japan and the United States.
And very quickly before we let you go, Dr. Go, we are running a little short on time. Germany joined the U.S.-led United Nations Command in South Korea last week, becoming the 18th nation of the UNC, built to police the world's most heavily fortified border. What's behind Germany's somewhat sudden and belated decision to join the UNC, and what does it mean for the two Koreas?
Well, it happened just now, but then the discussion about allowing Germany to join the United Nations Command was taking place since the Moon Jae-in presidency. At the time, President Moon Jae-in refused to allow Germany to join the UNC because at the time there was a concern that United Nations Command could become an alternative way of the U.S. forces in South Korea to remain in command of the overall defense and posture of the peninsula. But now I think with President Yoon, he's very much in favor of now strengthening the UNC because he wants to highlight the fact that North Korean threat is not just limited to South Korea, but it's global. So I think this is going to set the stage for other countries to join the UNC down the road.
All right, and we'll conclude our discussion there. Thank you, as always, Dr. Go, for your perspectives.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you, Dr. Klinger, for your insights.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.